Hello, and welcome to another tale of optimization and entrepreneurship. Today we have Carolyn Mooney from NextMV. She is the co-founder of the company, and she's going to tell us a little bit today about her journey. How did they start? What was the idea? And we are going to talk about what success looks like to her as an entrepreneur, as a person. And she'll also show us a few examples about how powerful optimization is in real life. So, Caroline, thanks for joining us. If you want to introduce yourself, the company, and we'll take it from there. Thank you for
Yeah,
joining.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. As Christina mentioned, I'm Carolyn Mooney. My background is in systems engineering, and I've been working on modeling and simulation for most of my career. Started out at Lockheed Martin and then ended up in the meal delivery space at both a small startup here in Philadelphia, which is where I am based, and then also at Grubhub prior to starting NextMove. And so next move is where basically teams build, test, and share decision optimization. And we're really excited to help people bring optimization into their businesses. And so we started the company back in 2019. We did Y Combinator right after that in 2020, and then we started scaling the company after that, all in the midst of COVID, which actually I think brought a really big highlight to optimization and decision models in general, because people had to figure out how to operate efficiently, kind of on the edges of where they normally were from a demand perspective, right? Or the systems didn't look the same anymore. And so a lot of things changed. And so, yeah, so we've been building the company since then. And we think a lot about how people interact with decision models, how they build them, how they test them, and how we make it a lot more common to see decision models working in businesses today.
Yes, that's very interesting too, because I was thinking like, how did you come up with this idea? Like there are so many things you can do the optimization space, but you wanted to go in this direction, which is quite technical
Yep.
and very hard to find a common template standard, right? Because all the models are different, but then how do you find this way to standardize deployment, basically?
Yeah. Yeah, we actually a lot of our learning. So my co-founder and I both were at Grubhub together, and he has his background in operations research, and did his PhD in mathematical optimization and different techniques there. And something that we saw at both the startup that we were at here in Philly called Zoomer, and then also at Grubhub, is that even though we were able to model the system or formulate the problems, right, to match, right, the vehicle routing problem or the scheduling problem that we were working on, we still found kind of a lot of friction in getting trust within the
Mm.
organization for that model, right, to be live, right? Because you're taking basically decision making out of purely the hands of the operator, right, or the person in the loop, and saying, hey, trust this computer to make some decisions for you, right? And I think in our space, a lot of times that trust comes in increments, right? So you kind of think about going from like a manual process to like an augmented process where that operator, right, is looking at those solutions and saying, do I trust them, right? So that they go through that feedback loop. And then finally, maybe you can allow them to go to a more automated system like an Uber, right? Or something like that, where those decisions are being made, very frequently and automated all the time. And so I think there's definitely that trust process. And we found that was challenging within every org that we were in. And we said, okay, well, are there pieces of the development process that actually make that trust better, right? Or increase that
Oh.
trust over time? And so that was really what we started thinking about is it shouldn't take one modeler and three or four engineers to get a system live, right? Like that seems like a miss because in other parts of the data ecosystem, whether you're building a database, right, or you're building an ML model, there's tooling out there for you to help you get it from prototype to live, right? And what we mean by live is not necessarily like the full automated process where decisions are being made every second, right, or on every minute kind of cycle, but we mean like live in a business process, right? Live for somebody to spend less time making manual decisions, right, and to be able to track and trace the decisions that they've made over time, right, that the business is operating on every day. And so that was really like what we started seeing, and we wanted to make an impact to the space in that way. to help modelers and business leaders and software engineers kind of all come together and create these solutions.
Yes, and you're doing it very well. I really like it.
We're trying. We're still in progress.
Yes. Yes, but as you say, like you are addressing a very tricky bit of any software implementation, the trust.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, the fact that you are managing to get the trust, that's fantastic. Because I think in my projects, that's always the first issue. There is no
Yeah.
trust. We don't trust. So, how do you overcome that? And you decided to, let's say, people do a lot of change management. You decided to address it with the technology, but yeah,
Yeah.
with the
Yeah, and
combination.
I think it's both, right?
Yeah.
Change management is definitely part of it. Like
Yeah.
Ryan actually, my co-founder Ryan wrote in the Informs article about like, using Git within, the operations research space or decision science space. And we think that's important too. But we also think it's important to be able to show something. I think like,
Mm,
I've said recently that I think the expectation around people interacting with models and with AI has gone through the roof with things
mm,
like ChatGPT because
yeah.
you don't have to be technical to interact with models anymore, right? Like you can
Yes.
actually say like you can ask questions to an LLM, right? Or you can look at, solutions for these, routing problems or scheduling problems, et cetera. So people I think are expecting to be able to interact with AI, right?
Mm,
And I think we're part of that space. I think that in general, operations research is a very like powerful discipline, but we're not necessarily prevalent across the industry yet, or maybe people don't see us as prevalent, even though we drive a lot of really core decisions, right, for a
mm.
lot of systems that you use every day. So I think that's an interesting like mix where it's an older technology. We've been around for a while. There's a lot of new stuff coming on, going on in our industry. But how do we get people more aware that this is the technology that's been driving these types of decisions, and this is how it's changing, and this is how it's expanding?
Yes, and that's a bit the purpose of this podcast. Let's show that you can actually interact also with the technology that comes from the decision intelligence space, not just ChatGPT,
Yep.
because there indeed you open it, you write in your own language. It's so easy.
Yep.
Whereas optimization or this operation research has this bit exclusive. You need to be very smart. You need to be very technical. You need to be. So now we are trying to show that it's not really
Yeah.
like that. And then maybe we can already show the examples that you prepared to show people a bit of
Yeah.
this space of operation research.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure. For sure. I think it's and maybe I'll make one more comment before we kind of dive
mm,
into some examples. Like I do think that there's some interesting aspects of, or parallels maybe to the Gen AI world where I kind of see us as practitioners in the space around like decision science. Like we're the ones doing the science part, right?
mm,
Building the engines, right, that solve these problems, just like someone is building an LLM, right, to be super efficient behind the scenes of a product like ChatGPT. How do we make an interface for our users, right, that they can evaluate different solutions or evaluate different decisions? I think that that's kind of the parallel that we see, right, is that we still need those super smart folks working on those engines, right? Because that is a challenging problem. That is a really tough math problem in the same way building an LLM is, right? So I think that's kind of the parallel that I see. But yeah, let's hop into a few examples and maybe we can go from there.
yeah, thanks for the comment. I totally agree. That's
Yeah,
exactly it. We need to do
for
a
sure.
bit more. Yes.
All right. So I think one of the main examples in the mathematical optimization space is the classic vehicle routing problem. And so we'll use that as kind of a starting point, and then we'll talk about some other examples as well about how optimization is kind of coming into the fold in other parts of the decision-making ecosystem for businesses. So I took this as an example, definitely an example that's like near and dear to me from time at Grubhub, but we'll use it as kind of a starting point to talk about how optimization can really impact a business. So let's just say you're in New York City and you're a lasagna delivery company and you have a bunch of vans that you need to assign, right, these different stops, these different orders that people, made orders for the lasagna delivery. So the question that you have is, okay, I have all these vans, I have all these orders I need to deliver. How do I efficiently route my vehicles and how do I make that efficient? And how do I make sure that I'm spending the least time on road that I can, right? And getting these orders to people on time. So if I'm starting from scratch, I probably start in spreadsheets. And so this is the reality, I think, for most businesses in most decisions, where you're going to grab all the addresses to all the deliveries that you need to make. You might drop them into a mapping service like Google Maps. You might see how far away from each other they are. Or you might start to do something like clustering stops and saying, well, everything in Soho or near Soho, I'm going to deliver together. And then you're going to repeat that process a bunch of times, right? Because you need to split up all these orders across the 15 vans that you have, and you have 400 stops, and maybe they can only fit a certain number every single time in the van, right? So you may need to make multiple trips. So no optimization is really happening here, but you are making decisions. And I think that's actually maybe a really important point that every operation that exists today is making decisions and has a decision model in play, but they may or may not be thinking about their operators as those decision models, right? Those humans that are doing the decision making, right, have like calculus in their head, right? They've been doing this day over day. They may be spending hours on it every day. And so they have kind of boots on the ground knowledge of understanding kind of some of the aspects of their system and what is good, right, for their business. So this process, like I said before, can take maybe 5 minutes to complete for one route, and maybe it takes a few hours, right, to complete for all the stops that you're trying to route. But I think the challenge here is you're not exploring all of that search space, right? If you think about like all the possibilities of routes that could happen when you have 400 stops and 15 vehicles, you're looking at like the hundreds, if not thousands, right, of potential combinations, right? And so how can you make sure that those plans are something that you can go back and look at and say, were they good? Do they meet the metrics that I need for my business? Right? Are we on time? How on time are we, right, to the deliveries that we've promised, right? And are we meeting the objectives that we set out to meet? So when we get to this point, when you want to start to audit your decisions, understand kind of how they're improving or not improving over time, and we want to evaluate more solutions, that's really when optimization comes into play. And there's a few different ways that you can think about activating optimization. You could reach for a SaaS solution. There are a lot of good SaaS solutions out there for a lot of these different problem types. And that just means you would start with the input file that you have, which is the where the vehicles are located, where the stops are located, and any of the data around those, right? So maybe the time window that you need to deliver the stop, that sort of stuff. That's all information, or I say like the state of the world that your optimization engine, right, or model needs to use to make those decisions. And so whether or not you start with a SaaS solution or you have a data science or decision scientist internal to your company that's building a model, you're going to start with that data, right? And it's going to be the same data that you were working off of manually, and you're going to be passing it into, this engine to kind of bring you back a solution. And so the powerful part about that is you can get a solution in seconds. And when you really think about kind of what does that mean on a day-to-day basis, now instead of spending hours every day making decisions about my route plans, maybe I only spend a few minutes because I get my solution back in seconds, and then I look at it and I maybe make a couple changes because I know some things that the computer doesn't know, right? That one of my drivers can't go to a certain store or something like that, or that sort of thing. And so I can make some of those modifications. And now I'm in a situation where I'm freed up to do other things. I'm freed up to either scale the business. I can handle more regions, right? So maybe I don't just handle New York City, but I handle Boston, right? And now I'm operating both, right, at the same time because I have more time to do so. Or I start thinking about maybe staffing decisions because we need more drivers. We're scaling the business, right? And we need to start recruiting more drivers. And I have time now to go do that, right? So it can open up opportunities for your business in ways that are not necessarily directly related to the decision that you're making, which I think is pretty cool. And this is, if we take it a step further, this is a chart of the actual number of solutions that we explored over the course of that solve, right? And so this is actually taken out of our product, but you can see kind of like what are the solutions, how many solutions did we get over time in how many seconds, right? So you can see maybe we got that first solution after a second, and we've started getting hundreds of solutions over the course of those few seconds that we ran the model. And if we take maybe this like from a visual perspective, which is I think why we use the multi-vehicle routing problem as an example all the time, because it's something very easy and tangible to understand, right? You can look at this and say, okay, I'm exploring some routes for one vehicle, and this is what some of those routes might look like. And even just this problem, like I don't know about you, Christina, but I look at this and I'm like, oof, that's a lot of checking Google Maps, right, for the connection between all these stops, right? And this is what it looks like when you're looking at all 400 stops. So
Wow.
you start to see like, we as humans can't like process all of this in a way that we're really good and we're really efficient, right, at building some of our solutions by our own heuristics. But how do we start to scale those decisions over time and not only scale them, but be able to go back and look at them? And I think that's like a really crucial piece.
Yes, wow, it looks very complex. Uh, yeah, and if I may hear a comment, so this is the idea is that it's a combination of the mathematical models and the technology. So, right,
Yes,
let's say the mathematical models, you have all those smart people solving the hard problems, as you said, and then you also have technology providers like yourself, which enable that you do that. So it's always a combination. You like one without the other. Yeah, it's a bit more difficult. Yeah, thanks for
definitely.
sharing the example.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm also happy to go into another example if you like
Yes, please.
around pricing. And so I mentioned before that, optimization is definitely not just our, multi-vehicle routing. I think sometimes we can get stuck in that as the core example. And one of the examples that I've been interested in recently is pricing optimization. And so a lot of organizations think about pricing. And when they think about pricing, they're thinking about how do I set prices for a particular product. So my example here is we're setting prices for avocados. And when you set prices for, a product, they may have different demand in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, right? And so you have to think about that price to demand curve, right? So if I set the price too high, nobody's going to buy, right? If I set the price too low, maybe too many people buy and they run out of avocados. And so how do you balance that? And somewhere in between, you probably have some waste, right, of avocados. And that's a pretty typical problem in like the retail space. But there's some other hidden costs, which are you need to transport, that product to wherever it's going, and you also need to store that product wherever it's going. And so how do you think about that too? And then with avocados, it's also a perishable. So you only have a certain amount of
Mm,
time you can store it, right? And so
yes.
I think these systems are really interesting in general. I feel like optimization makes the world more reliable, more efficient, right? And honestly, in some of these cases, right, more sustainable, right? There's a lot of sustainability goals that kind of get wrapped up into these decisions. And so what you're looking at here is actually our product and a particular model that someone has deployed, and maybe I'm using as an operator, right? I'm trying to see, okay, here's the plan for my operation. Do I think it's a good plan? And the plan here is to set, prices across all these different regions of the United States. And for each region, I'm going to get a certain number of sales, and I'm going to get some waste for every region. And so maybe my goal as like for the company for the year is to reduce waste. And so I don't love the fact that I'm getting a lot of wasted avocados in Mid-South, right? And so I might need to make a change, right, to influence the optimization in a way that I can reduce that waste, overall. And so I made that change here, and I said I didn't want to waste any avocados. And so you can see that I made a change and it resulted in the solution that I expected, but maybe I want to actually go back and look at what that result was in more detail. And so we have this way to kind of audit decisions, and I think this is really important, where I can go test new solutions and understand kind of what the system is doing when I give it different parameters. And so in this particular example, I ended up capping the price. So I said, the price of avocados in Mid-South can't go above a certain amount or below a certain amount. And maybe I need to cap the amount of avocados I can allocate to that region also, to try to reduce that waste. And so these are kind of the systems that we see people working in. but giving as a modeler, being able to give my operator, some visualization about what's happening and also the core metrics for that decision is really powerful.
Yes, it is. And it look like when you explain, it sounds so simple. You just do this and you kept the avocados, and yeah, I guess yeah, that's the power of the product you are making. That it's still complex, but it looks like it creates trust. That we are talking about
Yeah.
trust. Yes.
Yeah, and there's definitely still work like we as modelers, right, need to do in order to make this a
Mm,
reality, right? Like we need to give people the levers, right? Like when
mm,
you're building a decision model, like what are the levers that you can play with, right? For a pricing optimization model, maybe it's, the min and max price, right? That might be something that an operator or a user can set. If it's a routing problem, maybe it's a setting for preferences, right? Like, how much do you care about preferences? Maybe it's a score, right? Something like that. But giving people these like levers that then they can go test the system
mm,
with, I think is really powerful because then they have some intuition about how the decisions are being made and
mm.
they can come back to you with feedback on whether or not they like them and maybe some changes that could happen.
Yes, that's very good way of explaining things. Okay, thanks a lot for sharing the examples. I wanted to ask, like in the last model, what tools did you use? So to give an example, like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so we typically see a combination of tools, which is why we've built Next Move the way we have, right? We say
Mm,
there's a really rich ecosystem actually around optimization.
mm,
And there's a lot of different tools out there that decision scientists can use and that operators can use to look at the solutions, et cetera. So in the last example, we were using Ample and Highs in combination to build the model or the mathematical formulation. And then the charts that you saw there were actually driven from Plotly. So we
mm,
have kind of a combination of tools, right? From like analytics tools to
mm,
optimization tools to modeling optimization tools, right? Because it's not just the solver, it's usually a modeling layer of some sort like Ample too. And so kind of the combination of all those things allows, modelers to work efficiently to provide these solutions. And then we're providing that UI and that interactive experience and the API, right? So that you can
mm.
integrate those systems with your software engineering team and also look at those solutions, with your less technical users, right? Product managers, operators, et cetera.
Yeah. Like one comment I have here is why am I asking this? Because in supply chain, it's a little bit different. Like typically people buy a planning tool first, or the companies buy a planning tool, and then maybe they add an optimization model. Um, Whereas you propose another model, and I think sometimes also in supply chain, people don't need to to buy that planning tool, which is very expensive. It takes a very long to implement. They actually just need the optimization model. So I'm trying to say that you can buy a planning tool with an optimization model, but sometimes if you just need an optimization model, you can do it, like using, as you said, AMPL, NextAV, Higgs, Gurobi, and other software. So I'm trying to get this idea across in supply chain that we can do better optimization in two ways, not just one. That you need to go
Yeah.
via buying a planning tool, because if you use AMPL, Higgs, and the reporting system, you get very good results. And yeah, if you use your ERP system plus this optimization module. It's the
Yep.
same as buying a planning tool, which has an optimization module inside.
Yeah, and I think that's right to a certain degree, right? Like I feel like there's like varying levels of decision making too. Like when
Mm,
you're thinking about like,
mm,
the supply chain planning, I think that kind of really falls in that strategic bucket, right? Where you're trying to understand what does your system look like over the next year, the next two
mm,
years, right? How do I make decisions about like facility locations opening up, right? Or expanding to new regions, right? Those are some big questions for businesses, right? And can warrant, right, like a much more I would say in-depth, right, maybe tool there, right? And so I think that's maybe the delta. We work a lot in like kind of I would say like more like the operational or
mm.
tactical decision making models is a lot of what people focus on within our platform. And those are things that are happening maybe day over day, week over week, or maybe even month over month, where you're making decisions on a little bit tighter time scale.
Mm.
That's not always the case, right? Sometimes you're building sub modules for those strategic simulators
Mm.
or
Yeah.
planning solutions, right? And so there's definitely a continuum, right, of the different optimization tools. But we definitely see that as kind of, part of the aspect that we really like care about is building optimization models that are impacting the business all the time, right? Or something that we're working with a lot, right? And evaluating a lot. And I think yeah, I'm excited about the space, especially like as people are talking more about decision intelligence. I think people are realizing that there's kind of these buckets, right? There's like the science bucket and there's like the operations bucket. I think there's been some discussion about that on LinkedIn and other social aspects, and I think that's like a really cool way to think about it, right? Like there's the how do you model a problem. We talk about that a lot within operations research, within the informs community, academic community, et cetera. But how do you get that model live into a business process, right? And I think
Mm.
that's where we focus. We're kind of on that
Mm.
edge of the industry or the community that way.
I have a few questions about like what brings you energy in this very, I imagine, challenging running a business, and then what brings you energy, and also what were the challenges that you feel, yeah, shaped your path.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I really enjoy the process of of getting systems live.
Mm.
So when we have customers that are like launching and then they come back and say like how much impact they've seen, from launching routing, launching scheduling, launching, whatever the decision model may be, that gives me a lot of energy because like I think that's really cool. Like you're solving a problem, like a real business problem. Like I think that's the coolest part about a lot of mathematical optimization and decision models in general, right? They're real. Like you're
Mm.
deciding, somebody's schedule for the day, right? Or you're deciding that a particular package goes with this particular vehicle or goes through this particular distribution center. Like that's a physical thing. And I get a lot of energy from that. I think that's cool. Like that's the mixing of like technology and like the real world. So I think that's one of the things that I've always enjoyed about the space. And even enjoyed when I was working on like simulation too, because that was like a representation of the real world, right? And you're trying to make sure that when you launch something in the real world, it's going to do what you expect. So I think I get a lot of energy from that process with customers, right? Just like hearing from them that something worked and that like we made their lives easier, better, like especially from the modelers when we hear like, hey, we were able to get this live and it just like it took so much less time. Like that's awesome, right? Like we want more of the decision science folks to be successful in their businesses, and we think like that the tooling part of this is a really big way to get there. And so I think that that's something that gives me a lot of energy and is also just like cultural kind of thing too for me. Like I coach volleyball on the side, and I enjoy the process of like getting things to be like more efficient, building a team, building a culture. And I think that's another thing that brings me a lot of energy. I love the folks that I work with. We have a lot of talented individuals at Next Move and really passionate about different aspects of the business and how we build the product. So that's always really fun to see too.
Okay. And what were the challenges? So, like along the way as an entrepreneur, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's the classic ones, right? Like we were a small team. We never have enough time to do all the things. We have so many fun ideas, right? And, our team is always bringing new ideas, right, to the
Mm.
table about how we could, build other features into our product, right? Or, tackle this new part of the industry or whatever. And, I think that's the core challenge of being a small company and being a startup, right? Is where do you spend your time? How do you spend your time? And how do you drive towards that like ultimate vision that you have as a company? So I think I mean, that sounds boring, but I think that's like the classic challenge, right? Is just that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I don't think I have anything other than the where to spend time, where to focus is always a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and now towards the end of our conversation, I want to ask Caroline about her definition of success. What is success? But more, maybe with a little bit of nuance, what was success to you in 2019 and what is success now? If it changed and yeah, how did it change and why?
Yeah. I think, when we started the company, back in 2019, success looked like getting a first user, honestly. Right. And that seems like really, really trivial, but when you're starting a company, you're starting something from nothing.
Mm,
And so you have to kind of build all the pieces, and getting that first user was super exciting. And I remember we started getting somebody trialing our software when we were on our way to go do Y Combinator out in San Francisco, and like that feeling of like doing this like tech accelerator and also having our first user and like all that stuff was super exciting. And I think like that was really what success looked like, was getting that first user activated and like and starting to use the product. I think now when I think about success, I think about like how do we drive more of our industry and democratize like optimization technology, honestly. Like that's like really what I think about as success. Like how do we make it so that our type of AI, right, of decision intelligence is prevalent?
mm,
How do we make it so that it's not just like like to your point, like something that's super complex, right, and only accessible at like a high science background level. Like I think that is what I view as success now, right? And getting more people to interact with models, really helping them see this as like the next frontier of the data stack, right? Like we've spent a lot of time as technology industry thinking about how to get data super accessible, how to build predictive models, right? And then now how do we get people to think about building decision models? Like I think that that's what success looks like to me, is like is a world where business leaders like understand that decision models and decision optimization makes a big impact, and they need to invest in it. Like I think that's what it looks like for me now.
okay. But I think we can add that it's not only about the business, because I also realize we have, or me, I have the tendency, oh, we bring business value, but it's about you also bring value to society, right? So
Yes.
also governments need to invest, I don't know, city halls need to invest, because it really brings a lot of value, as we keep saying, in our daily life, like vehicle routing problem or like bus scheduling, flight scheduling, and for just a
Yeah.
few examples. But like it has so many applications, and yeah, for some reason it remains a little bit obscure.
Yep.
But yeah, that's a bit what we are doing here, trying to make
Yeah.
it more
And I think that's right.
friendly.
Like I personally believe that like our space has a lot to do with sustainability goals.
Hmm.
And I don't know that we talk about it enough, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of businesses, a lot of governments are trying to figure out like how do they tackle
Hmm.
sustainability? Well, imagine, right, if every routing service is driving 10% less on the road, how much does that reduce emissions, right, overall, right? And so things like that, I think, like, can have a huge impact, and are an area that I truly believe that we can help solve.
Okay, so let's keep talking about sustainability as well,
Yeah,
besides the vehicle routing problem, which I hear is very popular, right? Uh,
I
yeah,
agree.
and I'm trying also to talk about supply chain, because I come
Yep,
from supply chain, and I believe that there is space, a lot of space for improvement and innovation. But let's
yeah,
first improve it. And I think optimization plays a very big role there.
agreed.
And it's not that complex to implement and to achieve, and it brings huge benefits. Okay, thank you very much, Caroline. It was great talking to you. I wanted to ask if you feel that you want to say something which we didn't discuss, and you want our community colleagues to remember something from you.
Yeah. I think like the biggest like thing that I would like to say maybe at this closing is like, look, we really want to support the community. Like I truly believe that we should be building more models, impacting more businesses, impacting governments, right, et cetera, like all the things we were just talking about. And so we want to be helpful. We want people to try us so that we can help you build better models,
Hmm.
right, faster, right? I think like that's a big thing, for us, is like how do we help you? Like we want to hear from you. We want to know what tools you need. We want to know like what's holding you back, right? Where
Hmm.
where are you finding friction, right? In the models that you're trying to create or the spaces that you're trying to impact. Because hopefully we can all make it a little bit easier to use this technology, right? And bring it to more companies. I think like that's the last thing I'll say.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have many questions or suggestions or ideas for next MV, how can they make
Yes.
everything more accessible? You're welcome to contact Caroline or Haley or anybody from next MV, I imagine. Okay, because you're always super friendly and very easy to talk to, and I really like that. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.